Admitting powerlessness over our problems is extremely difficult, and putting God at the forefront of our lives in the face of those problems is even more difficult still. Welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Alan Hyde, and I'm your host. I ask you to join me as we unravel stories of recovery, shift perspectives, and inspire change in those who are seeking answers and solution. Let's get into it. Hey guys, today's reading comes from In God's Care, Daily Meditations on Spirituality and Recovery. Happiness in the older years of life, like happiness in every year of life, is a matter of choice, your choice for yourself. And that's a quote by Harold Azine. We empower ourselves every time we accept responsibility for choosing the thoughts and feelings we act on. Choosing behavior that encourages happiness is often as easy as any other choice, and the rewards are certainly greater than when we act out of fear or resentment. Events we had expected to be troubling and relationships where we had predicted conflict are more likely to turn out surprisingly smooth when we come to them with a happy attitude. We will feel better about ourselves when we are able to respond to other people with encouragement and hope. We complicate our life unnecessarily when we choose to act out of meanness, self-centeredness, or self-pity. Actions arising from negative attitudes eventually lower our self-esteem and block our connection to God. Happiness is often as simple as making the decision to take charge of who we are now as we rely on God's will for us. I will choose happiness today as I rely on God's will for me. You know, this one is a powerful segment. When I was young, I had a lot of anger problems. And I would feel those feelings, whether it was hurt or sadness or loneliness, frustration. I would get angry, and I would act on it. And it got me in a lot of trouble, especially in high school. And it took a lot of years for me to kind of even out, if you will. I remember specifically when I was a senior in high school, it was during the mortgage crash of 2007, 2008. And my family was having a hard time. My dad had worked in mortgage my entire life, and we fell on hard times. And, I watched my dad try to hold it together, but he's human, and as he faced his struggles, he wasn't as readily available to me, and that made me angry. And I would often act out on that anger. And I remember one time, I had gone out and gotten into trouble with some of my friends, and I came home and my dad was pissed off. He was angry at me, and I didn't know how to handle it. There was raised voices, not just him. It was on both sides. There was raised voices. And I remember feeling this rage and anger that I had no idea what to do with. And we used to have the mail by the front door, and it was stacked up, and there were multiple stacks, and I'm standing by it, and I could see the look on his face. The look on his face was, "Don't you dare." And I turned to that stack of mail and I smacked it so hard that I'm sure they're still looking for mail under pieces of furniture to this day. And I remember, nothing was resolved. It was kind of like a quiet washed over afterwards, but nothing had been addressed. It was just pure anger, and I had chosen to act on it. And, of course, that didn't lead to a resolution, but it led to more consequences. I was now even more trouble, right? And that was a cascading avalanche, if you will. In my teenage years into my early adulthood, I would have the feeling of anger or resentment or hurt or sadness, and I would act on those things. And as the years progressed, I learned in my recovery that I don't have to act on my first thought. I don't have to act on big emotions. And that took me a while to wrap my mind around. I had to be shown what that looked like. I had to have other people in my life who had years of recovery and practice with feeling big emotions and coping with them, with managing them, talking it through with other people, going to meetings and sharing their experience, being of service was another really good way, that I watched people cope with difficult things in their life. And yeah, I remember when I first would walk into support groups, I'd be baffled because everybody would be in a good mood. But like, how could we come into a room where everybody is experiencing difficulties and everybody's laughing, And I remember thinking, I want some of that because I don't know how to laugh or take it easy when times are hard. And I struggled with that for a lot of years. Those teenage years when I would act on that anger aggressively, I got arrested. My senior year of high school, I pushed a lot of people away. I was getting on my parents' last nerve, and I had nowhere to turn. And I imagine a lot of us as even adults experience that. In my clinical practice, I treat about 30 people each week, and I've done so for years and years. And we all have that similar story. I experience a big emotion. I try to think it through, but my negative thoughts or spinning thoughts went out, and then I behave. And there's a lot of different behaviors, that could manifest. I mean, you name it, the list could go on forever, but it's like, do you turn to substances? Do you break things? Do you yell at your loved ones and get in fights with your significant other? Do you have a hard time not spending money when you're upset? Do you go and try to drink your sorrows away at the bar? Do you try to get laid? There's all kinds of ways that people try to distract themselves from their emotions, and those things manifest through the years. And I know they did for me. Here I was, a therapist with many years under my belt and going to recovery support meetings. And I still, in the beginning of my journey, had a hard time managing my emotions in my personal life. It wasn't until I started to trust in God's will for my life and trust that other good people would support me that I started to take responsibility for myself. And that was the first step to setting me free. I'd have an emotion and I would say, you know what? I'm going to take responsibility for the way that I act when I'm feeling this way. I'm not going to get angry, right, toward somebody else. And if I'm angry towards myself, I'm not going to treat myself poorly either. What I am going to do is maybe pick up some of the literature that's been suggested to me, and I'm going to read about how other people manage and cope in their lives, like we're doing here in this podcast, or I'm going to talk to somebody about their experience. And I'm not going to call around and try to talk to 50 people about their experiences. I'm going to try to get a hold of one person and I'm going to hear them out. I'm going to slow things down and take a breath. I'm not going to look for answers all over the place. I'm going to take responsibility for the fact that I need to talk to people. And then I'm going to talk to somebody who's reasonable. And once I have that person on the line, I'm not going to, as soon as I get off the phone with them, say, you know what? I don't really like what they were saying. Let me go and try to talk to somebody else. I'm gonna take in what they have to say. It may not fit every single time. It may not be exactly what I need to hear every single time. But the reality is I just needed to talk to somebody. That was another way to cope with my emotions. I needed to be heard, and I imagine they did too. You know, Going to the literature, you'll find all kinds of books and pieces of information out there in today's day and age where you'll hear experiences of people, how they're coping with anger and frustration and sadness and feeling hurt and feeling lonely and situations that are just ripped apart by the struggles and the suffering that life presents. And if you utilize these tools like talking to people, reading the books, going to meetings, let's pause on that one for a moment. So I don't know what your struggles are, the everyday listener, but odds are there's a place where people are meeting up to talk about those things. Maybe you lost a loved one. Go to a grief and loss support group. They're all over the place. If you Google it, you'll find one in your area pretty quickly. you know, do you have a loved one who's struggling with substances? Well, Al Anon is a wonderful program to help you find answers and solution for you in that process. AA, NA, all of those types of 12-step programs. If you got a problem with substances, there's Sex Anonymous. If you got a problem with, sexual compulsivity, anything you can think of, there's a support group for you. And it's a group of good people who are ready to be of service to you. And so maybe you already know that. Maybe you're a listener that has already accepted support groups because, well, that's how you found my information. Or maybe you stumbled across this episode and you just needed to hear today that it's okay to go and take responsibility for our struggles and humble ourselves a little bit to go to a support group and be around people who understand. And I promise you this, that's precisely what's going to happen. You're going to be surrounded by people who understand you, who listen to you, and who don't judge you. You know, and if all else fails, I'll return to praying. You know, this reader today in the section that we're reading picks no bones about turning to God. All right. My mind can be at one with God. Today I will give my thoughts to God. If all else fails, we can hit our knees and say, hey, God, take this from me. I don't want to carry this right now. I don't know what to do with it. Please take this from me. And I've found personally, when I decide to be vulnerable in those ways, that there's a lightness to it. There's a peace that can wash over you the more you practice it. And how do I know that as well? Is because it didn't in the beginning work that way. It took me time to be genuine about it. And when I got genuine about it, I started to experience the peace and serenity that comes with that. And by taking responsibility for the fact that I wasn't doing anything with my emotions, I would feel them and then I would act on them. And when I would act on my emotions in a raw place, I'd get myself in trouble. I'd experience consequences. I'll tell you another quick little story. When I was 17 years old, I was a senior in high school. And I was dealing with, some problems at home. And maybe I think at the time it was a fight with my mom and my brother, probably over my brother's alcohol use or just another wonky situation going on at home. And I decided I was going to go out with my friends that night. And what was I going to do? I was going to drink and I was going to drink at them. And, really trying to forget the situation. And when I was out, I was with dudes who were a bad influence for me. And they started suggesting that we vandalize this church that we hung out behind. And uh, I wasn't taking responsibility for my life at that time. I don't imagine many 17-year-old boys know exactly how to anyway, right? I mean, some do, and, slow golf clap for them. But I wasn't one of those guys. I was one of the guys that didn't think before he acted. And so I went along with it. This was a group of guys that were a little bit older than me, and I succumbed to the peer pressure and I was under the influence. And that's a storm that has consequences waiting to happen. And so we commenced and we vandalized that church. And of course, as you can imagine, it didn't take long. The cops showed up. We did not get away. Was arrested, and at the time, I was hoping to go to college and play baseball and do all of those things, and it ruined a lot of those situations for me. A lot of opportunities evaporated really quickly. Um, and it was because I didn't think before I acted. It was because I was angry and I came from an environment and a family that, although good people, didn't have the best coping skills. I wasn't modeled growing up how to slow things down. No one ever grabbed a young dude like me and said, hey, here's how we choose to behave when we're feeling big emotions. It was more of like, everybody's already angry. It's already really loud in here. If you want to be heard, you need to be louder or be the loudest. And well, I found really creative and clever ways to be the loudest, and I got in trouble a lot. And that culmination, my senior year of high school, was getting arrested. And it took me a lot of years to bounce back from that, to piece together a life. And God willing, I did. But it would take me even more years past that to finally hit my knees and say, okay, God, I see you. I see your hand. Things could be worse. But not only could things be worse, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I keep trying to do things my way and it's not working. And once I started to admit those things to myself and look at my own behaviors, which is just one of the hardest things that any of us will ever have to do, is to look at our own behaviors. But once I started to do that, people started to show up. And those people that showed up were people who had looked at their own behaviors, admitted their wrongdoings, admitted their shortcomings, and followed a simple set of rules, followed simple structure. And that simple structure made their lives better. It gave them an alternative way to take responsibility for their lives, admitting powerlessness, trusting in a higher power, taking a fearless and moral inventory, looking at our shortcomings, making amends with people that we had hurt. And those things work. I made a lot of amends over the years to the courts to pay restitution to the places that we had vandalized that night, and gave a little bit back to my community over the years where I had grown up, and in different ways, mostly through baseball. But I found ways to be of service to my community before I eventually moved away, and it's made my life so much better. It's freed me, and it allows me now in my adult life, when I have difficult emotions or suffering occurs in my adult life, just the challenges of everyday life, I look at situations, I take a breath, and I trust that I have good people in my life that I can talk to and turn to, and that I know how to manage those emotions just even a little bit better today. And by knowing that I can manage them just a little bit better, it allows me to choose what my actions are going to be. A gift that I did not have when I was younger. I did not have the gift of that pause, that time in between. Only in years of recovery have I really pieced together the ability to choose my actions and take responsibility for my life. And so if you're listening today, I want to encourage you to, take responsibility. Look at your feelings, look at how you're choosing to act and behave, and know that just because it may feel a little bit out of control or unmanageable right now does not mean you have to stay there. It doesn't mean you're alone. It doesn't mean that that's the only way, right? It just means that, we may need some extra support. And if you're one of those like me who needs extra support, that's okay. There are so many strong and wonderful people out there just like you who've admitted that they need that support. And when you do, you free yourself. And so I want to encourage everybody listening today, if you need that support, to reach out, look in your area for support groups, reach out to me, go to my website, connect, reach out, look for the information, and you'll find it. That's all I got for you guys today. Thanks for hanging in there with me. If you did relate to any of the reading today or any of the nonsense I was talking about, then I would encourage you to keep listening to these episodes. I'll be uploading pretty much daily, and I look forward to connecting with you guys more. Have a blessed day. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Breaking the Cycle. If you're looking for more information regarding the topics that I discuss in this podcast, jump over to alanhyde.com. The website will be in the description. If you're looking to get involved, make a donation, or to get your hands on some cool Breaking the Cycle merchandise, that will also be available at the website, and we encourage your support. Without your support, this podcast would not be possible. So I just want to thank you, and as always, bless your heart.